Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. You managed to make it from Ross's room on the other side of the conference center then, yeah? And luckily, you managed to find a seat in the small room that we were given this afternoon as well. So, my name's Greg Taylor. I'm a Principal PM in the Exchange Office 365 team. This is OUCB313. Trips off the tongue, doesn't it? This is the Exchange Server Client Access Role overview. All right, so what my plan is for the next hour and a bit is really 5 key areas that I'd like to focus on. Some fundamentals. We're going to cover on some fundamental CAS things that I use to, help me understand and help to explain simply to people the CAS role. We're going to talk about protocol and how the protocols, different clients access CAS, access the mailboxes, and how each of those work with different versions of Exchange. We're going to talk about 2007, 10, and 13. We're going to talk a little bit about OA FBA. There's something kind of neat that we've done there so that FBA works in a slightly different way, and I thought that might be interesting for the nerds, for the inner nerd amongst you. We're going to talk about load balancing. You've probably seen from some of the early Exchange sessions that we've done, we talk about layer 4 load balancing and why you don't need layer 7 load balancing. So I'd like to talk through some of that. And then slightly away from CAS but related is publishing Exchange to the internet in a world post-TMG. Sad, right? But what are we going to do in a world post-TMG? So that's really where we're going to go today. So let's start with a picture that we use quite a lot because it's a very simple, clear way to explain CAS at quite a high level. For any client accessing their mailbox, we've got the user at the top here, they are always going to be serviced, the protocol is always going to be serviced by the mailbox server that hosts the active copy of the database in which the user's mailbox is in. So clients will connect through a load balancer. We've got here layer 4, but it could be layer 7, it could be anything. And they all hit an individual CAS. And as you can see in this, the same user could be connected to 3 different CAS. Now, in 2007 and 10, this was a bit of a no-no. In 2013, we're able to do that because each CAS then uses the Active Manager. It does a directory lookup and Active Manager to figure out where the user's mailbox is at any point in time. And the real advantage, is beautifully simple in its operation, in the sense that, the user's mailbox moves from database or from within database from server to server, but the client's still connected to CAS, and it's just the CAS that's moving the connections around between the CAS and the mailbox server. So the CAS is making a determination as to where to proxy the traffic, and in this case, it's actually still proxy from CAS back to the mailbox server. And so wherever the mailbox moves, the CAS connections follow, but the client connections are never broken. And this is one of the reasons why you no longer get the administrator has made a change that requires you to restart Outlook, because the endpoint has never changed. Okay? So some fundamental things as well. So CAS really does 3, or if we're going to be pedantic about it, 4 things really. It authenticates the user at an HTTP layer, an HTTP level. And that could be using BASIC, or it could be using Windows, or any type of authentication mechanism, FBA, whatever it may be. It authenticates the user, and it does that so it can figure out where the user's mailbox is. Now, as a side note, that can be kind of interesting when you have multiple mailboxes being opened within the same Outlook profile, because the HTTP layer authentication is the primary user who's accessing the mailbox, but you might be accessing additional mailboxes through that connection, so think about that. But it's a bit of a weird corner case, but it's certainly an important one to consider sometimes. CAS then locates the user's mailbox. Active Manager, all tied into the high availability framework that Exchange 2013 has. We proxy the connection, or in the case sometimes we'll redirect the connection to another CAS, but either way we'll get the connection to the mailbox server, user accesses the mailbox, everybody's happy. CAS has been called a dumb proxy. Well, as dumb as quite a lot of code and quite a lot of clever stuff that goes into it, how dumb can it make it? It's a pretty sophisticated piece of technology, but essentially it's a smart proxy. Let's not be harsh and call it dumb, right? Let's call it smart. It figures out where your mailbox is, and it gets you connected to it. You may have also seen this slide presented by my esteemed colleague Ross, I think, at MEC was the first time we probably did this one. And it shows, we were making an architectural point about how CAS can be used, how architecturally the product works. But it has led to a little bit of confusion, so I want to clarify this. We're going to look at quite a few diagrams like this today. So in a simple case where a client's accessing their mailbox through a CAS in the same AD site as the user's mailbox is located in, the client makes a connection through the load balancer, it talks to the CAS, authenticates, locates the mailbox being in the same AD site, and proxies the connection to the backend mailbox server. Pretty straightforward. What if I have a second AD site? So if I have a second AD site, a cross-site redirect request is an example of one of those, where the user makes a logon request, the CAS in the first site realizes the mailbox is in another internet-facing AD site, and it redirects the connection across. A cross-site OA redirect in this particular case. Now, what if the user comes in through the site, through this middle internet-facing site, but the mailbox is in a non-internet-facing AD site? Now, we showed the diagram to prove that this, or to demonstrate that this is the way the protocol works, and it absolutely is. If you come in through this first CAS in the middle AD site here, that CAS will send the connection or proxy the connection directly to the mailbox server in the site where the user's mailbox is located. And so this often led to the question being asked, well, do I need a CAS in every AD site? Well, strictly according to this diagram, no, you don't. But there are not many scenarios where this really, in the practical world, makes a lot of sense. So what about this group of happy-looking people here? Right? They work in marketing, you can tell. They've got their big smile, but no idea what they're really smiling about kind of look, right? Okay? What about these poor guys? They're over in this AD site, and that's where their mailboxes are. How do they access the mailbox? Through CAS. Which CAS? Well, probably this one. So what have you now done? You've now doubled the WAN traffic, right? Connections going across the WAN, back across the WAN, and you've also made your WAN a single point of failure. So that if your WAN or connectivity between these two sites goes down, the happy marketing folks can't even get to their own mailboxes. Okay? So in real terms, absolutely you would need to put a CAS in that site. You have local users. It makes perfect sense. So our support statement on TechEd are very much clearer. I think we do say now you do need a CAS in every AD site where you have a mailbox server. And strictly, for this scenario, well, for this really, it's the right thing to do. Technically, is the way the protocol works, it actually might not be used in some scenarios when they're coming in from the internet, for example. But yes, the answer is you need a CAS in every AD site, or the users in that AD site are hosed if your WAN goes down. So there are three things that I kind of quite often get into, and they help me understand and explain CAS pretty simply. So let's get into the client connectivity flow, how each of the different protocols work with 2013, and Auto-Discover is always a great place to start, I always find, because it helps introduce usually a lot of other things. So I have a few diagrams, and they're all going to look pretty similar. So let me give you a sort of quick overview of what you're looking at. So you have the clients on the outside, the namespace that they're coming through, in this case, autodiscover.contoso.com. I have an internet-facing site, which is this larger site to the left and center, and an intranet site. And I have different versions of Exchange. Now keep your eyes closely on the numbers and the versions. They're all the same lovely white color, right? But the version numbers are specified in the wording. So in the case of an Auto-Discover client coming in from the internet, the first thing that happens, as you know, is the client goes off to DNS, queries for autodiscover.contoso.com, makes a connection, and authenticates. The CAS, in this case, the 2013 CAS, because you're moving your Auto-Discover namespace to 2013 up front. That's an important thing to do. And the reason you do that, just as an aside, is that 2013 knows what to do with 2007 and 10 and 13. If you left Auto-Discover pointing at 2010, it doesn't really know what to do with 2013 clients that come in. It will redirect them, or either way, it doesn't really have the best logic. The most up-to-date logic is in the newest version of CAS. So in this case, we've figured out the user's mailbox location. It's in the bottom left, indicated by this little orange pawn down the bottom here. And so in this case, CAS 2013 proxies the connection to CAS 2010, and CAS 2010 actually generates the Auto-Discover XML response, which goes back to the client. CAS 2013 is just the proxy. It doesn't do any work or anything at all in that regard, or any other business processing or logic. It proxies the request. Now take the case where we've got another user, and we've got a user in the intranet site. So a non-internet facing site. Again, the client queries DNS. Where do you think the client's going to go? This CAS is going to authenticate. Now, do you think he's going to go to the CAS in the same AD site that he's in, or the CAS in the AD site that, sorry, actually it's the other way around for you, isn't it? In the CAS in the intranet-facing site. He's going to send it to, remember something I said earlier, he proxies things generally to the CAS in the AD site that the user's mailbox is in. That's when he does the authentication and the lookup, that's where he sends the connection. Okay? What about 2007? Now, 2007 is a bit different. And primarily it's because we don't really proxy anything to 2007. And the reason for doing that, just to throw that one out there, was 2007 was already kind of pretty much in the end of its life at the stage when 2013 was coming about. And we didn't really have a vehicle for shipping updates other than roll-ups. No more service packs. You know we had 2010 Service Pack 3, which was required for coexistence, right? A lot of the work, a lot of the things that you're seeing here were dependent upon a service pack for 2010 to make it work. We weren't going to ship another service pack for 2007, so we were limited in what we could do with 2007. So here's what we dreamed up for this one. So the client, if the mailbox is on 2007, the CAS is still receiving the connection. The mailbox is down here in the bottom left. He's trying to figure out what to do. And what he actually does in this case is he sends it to the mailbox 2013 server. You might think, what does he want to do that for? Okay, he does that because actually mailbox 2013 is more closely related to a multi-role 2010 server in many ways, right? It's an evolution of a multi-role server. All of the logic that was in 2010 CAS, a lot of it is still on a 2013 mailbox server. And obviously that's where we proxy from the CAS at the front to the 2013 at the back. You'll see when you look in IS, all the VDIRs are all there still. So we actually chose to proxy the request to the 2013 back-end mailbox server. And he generates a 2007 version, Autodiscover XML, which is returned to the client, and the client makes his connection. Then step one forward, you can probably guess the last scenario. The last scenario is now that the client is in the non-internet facing site. CAS does a lookup, and it sends it to mailbox 2013 in the same AD site that it's in. There isn't a 2013 mailbox server in the other site, and in fact, in this case, even if there were, in this particular protocol, we'd send it to the local mailbox server. Whether that makes sense or not, that's how it's working, right? So we're going to walk through some of these, just to give you an idea. And these are going to be good reference material, hopefully, for the future for you, if you're ever interested in troubleshooting a problem. This will help you determine. Now, here's the other case of Autodiscover, which is internal clients who look up something called service connection points within AD, or as I prefer to call AD, the triangle, right? Because after all, it's just a triangle. The AD guys love us for saying that, but it is just a triangle. So they go into AD and they look up service connection points, and then at that stage, it's pretty much exactly the same. Nothing really changes. It doesn't really matter which site your mailbox is in. In this case, sorry, this is 2010. Back to 2010 for a second, sorry. We'll proxy this to both of the different CAS 2010s in the AD site that the user's mailbox is in. And 2007, if the mailbox is on 2007, we'll still go and look up the SCP records in AD, and no matter where the mailbox is, we're going to send the request to the 2013 backend mailbox server. So you can see Autodiscover, depending on the version of the mailbox, is going to behave in a slightly different way. But the important thing to understand is the version of XML that you get back is correct for your version of mailbox, and that the URLs you get back within the Autodiscover XML are correct for the AD site that you're in. Okay? So that logic is all still built in and takes place regardless within all of this, within all of these exchanges. That's still the end result. So that leads neatly into then Outlook and how Outlook has changed. So Outlook hasn't changed. The introduction of 2013 doesn't change how Outlook connects to 2007 or 10. Still connects directly to the mailbox server in the 2007 world, and it still connects to the RPC client access service in the 2010 world. So nothing changes. But as I'm sure you've heard and learned, and I'm not doing real basic stuff, I'm assuming everyone's kind of seen at least the basic architecture of 2013. All Outlook connectivity now for a 2013 user is Outlook Anywhere, RPC HTTPS, inside and out. which is a shift, clearly. Now, some customers actually already did that. Some customers have already been using Outlook Anywhere internally for a long time. And some of the reasons might be they found it easier to configure firewalls and WAN, routers and whatever else between networks because it was all TCP 443 HTTPS. But now we're kind of forcing that direction. And really, it's much simpler for us. It's a much more reliable protocol we're discovering, and that's really where all the investment is. So 2013, connectivity is Outlook Anywhere inside and out. And in fact, moving to Outlook Anywhere internally can win you a little bit of, and give you a bit of an advantage in your migration to 2013. And if you've watched the ELO blog, which I'm sure many of you do, then you'll see Brian Dave from our team did a blog post recently on ELO which explained how you could, it was something about ambiguous URLs and how you can ensure that if you have RPC client access names that are not, that you can have challenges with connectivity, and one of the solutions is to migrate to Outlook Anywhere early when you're on 2010 or 2007. So if you haven't read that blog post, that would be a very good read. Okay? Now, auto-discover, because we've got this now Outlook Anywhere connectivity inside and out, the Outlook client now has to understand this. And the Outlook client, up until we took this route, only understood Outlook Anywhere for external connectivity. It would have the EXCH nodes within the Autodiscover XML for the internal connectivity methods and the EXPR node within the Autodiscover XML for its external settings. Well, now we've got Outlook Anywhere inside and out. How does that work? Well, we made the Outlook client smarter. So a lot of those updates that you see are required updates for Outlook. Right? There's been several updates for Outlook, and an important component of those updates is the ability to understand this new XML. Because the new XML that we return when your mailbox is on 2013 contains some new XML nodes. They're called EXHTTP, and there are 1 if you only have internal Outlook Anywhere, or 2 if you have internal and external Outlook Anywhere. And the Outlook client now understands what these nodes are, and when they're present, it realizes your mailbox is on 2013, and it knows how to work with them. Interesting troubleshooting note then, which is if you have Outlook 2007 and 10 clients, and you migrate to 2013, and you're having trouble with connectivity on some but not others, what do you think that would be? You probably don't have the updates on all of the Outlook clients. Be a very good starting point. It's the place I would certainly start looking. Okay? Now, one thing that we did do as well for internal Outlook Anywhere connectivity is we made the default HTTP rather than HTTPS. And it was primarily to get over the issue with self-signed certificates and being unable to connect because your Outlook client doesn't trust a self-signed certificate on CAS. That was really the kind of core problem because we took the route of doing self-signed certs in Exchange a few years ago. So what we did was we made a change just for the internal Outlook Anywhere connectivity to make it HTTP rather than HTTPS. But it's only the mail and directory connections that see HTTP. And internally, it would be NTLM auth. So you're not passing a password over in the clear like you would with basic auth. You're actually doing it NTLM. The password never actually crosses the wire. So whilst connectivity for mail and directory will work out of the gate, it doesn't solve the problem with web service URLs, EWS, OAB downloads, that kind of stuff. They're all still going to require HTTPS, and they will still throw certificate warnings typically as well. So whilst if you throw this all together in a test lab, you put an Outlook client and a 2013 Exchange box, mail and directory will work, no certificate pop-ups. If you start trying to do availability service or set a noof, you'll start seeing pop-ups as well. So it's kind of, we at least want to get you connected from a mail perspective, but it doesn't mean your job is over. You still have work to do. All right, so Outlook Anywhere. This is an important one as well. So in a 2007 and 10 coexistence with 2013 scenario, you're adding 2013 to an existing 2007 or 10 org, and you're going to have Outlook Anywhere connectivity coming through 2013, which would be the recommended approach. Whether this is external or internal, the clients are connecting to this namespace here, mail.contoso.com, and they're going to hit the RPC proxy. In fact, it looks like an RPC proxy DLL as far as the Outlook client's concerned, but it's the new CAS 2013 kind of proxy version of it. And it authenticates the connection, and it looks up the mailbox, and it figures out what to do with it. Now, in the scenario here, I've got a mailbox in the bottom left, and it doesn't really matter whether it's 2007 or 10 in this case. We have to get the connectivity to this. Now, in an Exchange 2007 or 10 world, the connection would have gone from the CAS that received the connection to either the mailbox server or the RPC client access array. In this case, we proxy it to the other CAS of the same version that the user's mailbox is in. However, we proxy to the RPC proxy DLL, or the Outlook Anywhere endpoint, which means you have to enable Outlook Anywhere on this CAS. This CAS has to have Outlook Anywhere enabled. And what's more, when the connection comes across, it's Windows Auth being used between the servers. Now, that can be problematic if you're telling your clients to use basic authentication to talk to the first CAS, but you need IIS to be using Windows Auth for the CAS-to-CAS communication to work. Okay? You can configure this. You have to set the client auth method to basic and the IIS auth method to NTLM, okay, to get this to work. But it's an important step. Same is true if your mailbox is in the non-internet facing site. Now, this one's even a little bit zen. This one you've really got to get your thoughts around, because this is a non-internet facing site. But you have to enable Outlook Anywhere, which doesn't make an awful lot of sense if you're pure 2007 and 10 and thinking about that world. But you need to enable Outlook Anywhere on the CAS in the site so that we can proxy to the Outlook Anywhere endpoint on the CAS in the other site. But of course, the Outlook Anywhere host name that you would use for the CAS in this non-internet facing site is equal to the CAS in the internet facing site. Got to really think when you use some of these phrases, right? Because it gets a bit confusing. The host name on a non-internet facing CAS is equal to the host name being used on the external facing CAS, because Autodiscover returns that host name to the client in the XML. And really, that's the reason for using it. But again, you need to make sure NTLM auth is enabled. So there are 3 steps, really, in making sure that this particular scenario works. You need to enable Outlook Anywhere everywhere in the org. Okay? Outlook Anywhere being enabled everywhere is a prereq for making this work. Otherwise, stuff won't work. You need to make sure the authentication methods are set correctly so that the client auth typically is either basic or NTLM. If it's NTLM, you're in good shape, right? If you have NTLM Outlook Anywhere connectivity, typically that means you don't have to do anything else. But if you've chosen basic, you need to make sure the client auth is set to basic and the IIS auth is set to NTLM. And make sure the OA, the Outlook Anywhere host names are set correctly. And then you should be pretty good. So slightly complicated scenario, but if you've got 2007 and 10, you're going to have to figure this one out. So think about how this applies to your particular environment. All right, keep moving forward. So Outlook Web App. So in a 2010 coexistence scenario, my OA client connecting through mail.contosta.com connects to my 2013 CAS. He gets the 2013 white minimal OA logon page. He enters his credentials, and in this particular case, we figure out the user's mailbox is in the same site as the CAS that we're in, and we proxy the connection across. And in fact, we also made a change in SP3 for 2010 that means this works even if FBA is enabled on the CAS, the 2010 CAS that we're proxying to. So Service Pack 3 for 2010 made a change that allows you to have both Forms and Basic Auth enabled and Windows integrated at the same time. And it was all to support these kind of scenarios. Same scenario, but with a different site. Now, in this case, you've logged on. Mailbox is in the non-internet facing site. You have the FBA page. We can do a cross-site proxy request. There's nothing going on, just exactly as we did before. Okay? So no change in that regard. And FBA could be enabled on the CAS in the other site. Now this one's slightly more interesting. What if I have it's not an intranet site anymore. I have now 2 internet-facing sites. And my client comes into the first one, and my mailbox is in the second internet-facing site, different namespace. Now, the behavior at RTM 2013, as you may know, was this, which means double logon. So the user logs into 2013 and then gets redirected to CAS 2010 and has to log in again. Now, who thinks that's a great user experience? It's not one that one people really, enjoy. So the good thing is we've replaced that second logon page with a huge red X. No, sorry, not a huge red X. We've replaced it with single sign-on redirect in CU2. CU2, single sign-on, right? It's a bit of a pity clap because it should have been there right from the start, let's be honest, right? But when you rewrite OA, there's a heck of a lot of work to do. And this is, getting OA rewritten was a higher priority than this single sign-on redirect. But what this now means is we have parity with what we brought in 2010, SP2, CU, can't remember. CU, whenever. Okay? And so now when you log in through the first login page, you will be redirected to europe.mail.contosa.com, assuming FBA is enabled in both sites, which was the way it was with 2010. You'll be signed in, only having to see one logon page. Great, right? Definite improvement. We like that. Now, what about 2007? This is one of only two scenarios where the legacy namespace thing still comes into play. We did not write OA 2013 to be able to proxy to CAS 2007 for OA. Too much work couldn't be done, plus we couldn't make the changes required on 2007, as I said before. And so in this scenario, we have the same behavior that we did for 2010 to 2007 as well, which is the user hits the new FBA page, in this case 2013, and we locate the mailbox. And the mailbox is on 2007 in the same site, and we have the legacy, the CAS 2007 external URL is configured with a legacy value. And we would do the redirect. And again, in RTM and even in CU1, you'd have to log on again. Again, a pretty sucky user experience. So we fixed that as well. Okay, so that's all fixed too. Now we have the single sign-on redirect across to the legacy, and that's all good. Okay. Oh, come on, go forward. There we go. All right. Now here's an interesting one. This one you've got to get your crazy straws out for. The user's mailbox is here. What do you think we're going to do? Well, probably not that hard to figure out. We'll redirect to the legacy namespace, and again, in RTM and CU1, we'd redirect you to the legacy namespace, and we'd force you to log on again. Well, again, the same change means that you don't have to do that anymore, but we now do this. Okay, so we redirect you first to 2007. Sorry, that way, because that's behind me. And then that 2007 proxies across to the other 2007, just as it would if it were a 2007 with an internet and a non-internet facing site as well. It's really just the getting you to 2007 in the first place that's the important thing, or the new, with SSO, that's the new thing. Okay, so that works as well. What about 2007 coexistence where I have now multiple namespaces? You wait till we get to ActiveSync. If you think this one's crazy, you wait till we get there. Right. Okay, we've got europe.mail.contosa.com. We're going to give you the login page as usual. You log into 2013, we figure out where your mailbox is, and we redirect you. But of course, in this case, you won't have a 2010 logon page in a 2007 CAS. That would be fun if that happened. There's a slight typo on the slide there. But what you will get, again, is single sign-on. So in all of the OA scenarios, with CU2, which is not out yet, but will be out, I think, at the end of June, it's approximate timeline, or in the summer. There we go. Maybe never. I mean, who knows, right? It may. At some point in the future, if there is something called CU2, hopefully you'll find this in it. I think I got away with that one. Right. Then you'll find that this new behavior will be present. And so the new behavior means everyone can log into 2013, and assuming you've got this set up all correctly, they'll just get access to the mailbox in OA, regardless of the site or the version of mailbox the version of server that their mailbox is on. Okay, so I think this is a definite improvement. Very happy. Now, here's a new 2013 only scenario, which is kind of interesting. So I'm only going to think about the 2013 in this particular case, and we're nearly at the end of OA, so stay with us for a moment. User comes in, and we have two internet-facing 2013 AD sites. I have two separate namespaces, and the not equal to sign is demonstrating there that obviously the external URLs configured on the OA virtual directory and both those AD sites are not equal. In this case, the mailbox happens to be down in the other site that the user comes in from. Okay? Again, in RTM and CU1, we would have redirected you. and you'd have had to log in again, but as I'm sure you hopefully know now, we would single sign you on in this case too. The last one that's kind of interesting, I find, is this scenario. Now, I had plenty of people try and do this in 2007 and 10. They'd have two sites with the same external URL configured in both, and they'd say, well, this is awesome, because then it means I have a single unified namespace across all the sites. It was less than awesome, and I'll tell you why. Because in a 2010 world, 2010, if you came in through, let's say you're in this site, and let's just think about this for a second. Imagine for a second this says 2010 on the slides here for the server that you're connected to. It would redirect you to mail.contoso.com. Would that be very helpful? No. Because you'd come right back to the same CAS you just authenticated to, and you would log in again. And he would do the same again and again and again. I bet you got bored before the CAS got bored of doing this for you. With 2013 looks up the other external URL and the other AD site, and he says, they're the same. I see what you're trying to do there. You're trying to create a single unified namespace thing, right? So he just proxies the connection to the back-end mailbox server and just makes it work, right? That's a good, positive change again. So it definitely all plays into the sort of simplified namespaces that we've talked about with 2013 right from the beginning of the product lifecycle. So the single unified namespace, simplified namespace is a good thing, and this is a key component for OA. All right, okay. Strap yourselves in. ActiveSync's fun. Okay, so 2010 coexisting with 2013. Okay, this one's pretty straightforward. Because as you're probably figuring out by now, with 2010 we pretty much proxy everything. And so the same will be true in this particular scenario. The mailbox is in the same site that you've come into. There's a CAS 2010, mailbox 2010, we proxy and you're good. And the same is true when we add a non-internet facing site as well. We simply proxy between the sites. Not going to dwell too much on that. It's the same behavior we've seen for OA already, okay? And for AutoDiscover as well. If we throw another namespace in here, it's 2010 again. The connection, well, let's do this scenario first then, right? So the client is configured for europe.mail.contoso.com. He gets connectivity. He's talking directly to 2010. But if the client happened to be configured for mail.contoso.com, what are we going to do? Now, in the last version of Exchange, in 2010, we'd issue something called a 451 redirect. Familiar with that one, I hope, some of you at least? Well, we got rid of the 451 redirect, largely because many of the ActiveSync implementations that were out there in the world didn't know what to do with it. And so you'd end up with broken devices with nothing that we could do from the server side. So with 2013, we got rid of the 451 redirect. So we now won't redirect the client to another endpoint. We are just going to proxy and make it work. We figure making it work is better than making it efficient. Okay? In a 2007 world, this is fun. In a 2007 world, ActiveSync again, client comes in here. We actually do this. We first proxy the connection to the 2013 mailbox server, who then proxies it to the 2007 CAS, who then connects you to the mailbox. Okay? Now, it might look a little bit funky, and it's the only one that really does this, but it works. And there were some dependencies within the code that forced us down this path, unfortunately. It's not the cleanest route, because we couldn't directly proxy from CAS 2013 to 7. So that was the solution that we chose for this. It works, no issues with that at all. The diagram that makes it look far more interesting is when you consider that you have a non-internet facing site and a device connecting like this, because what we then do is, well, in that case, hang on a second, 2007 coexistence, 2013 mailbox to 2007 CAS to 2007 mailbox. Okay, so we'll proxy the connection from the mailbox 2013 server to CAS 2007. Again, the final scenario, or we're nearly at the end of the ActiveSync one, so if my device were configured for this endpoint directly, europe.mail.contoso.com, here's a question for you. And the question then is, what happens if you move a 2007 mailbox now from Europe to the US site? Remember I said we got rid of the 451s? Well, we only got rid of the 451s for 2013, okay? Which means that you would be 451 redirected back in this particular case because the CAS you were talking to was a 2007 CAS. All right, so from an active sync perspective, you've got two variables, really. You've got two additional things to consider. One, which is we don't proxy from CAS to CAS, but we proxy from mailbox to CAS, which is kind of funky. And the second is we lost the 451 redirect, really in order to keep reliability of the clients rather than convenience of the clients, let's put it that way. Okay? Web services. So an Exchange Web Services client. An Exchange Web Services client is exactly the same, really, as OA and ActiveSync from a 2010 coexistence perspective. We simply proxy across to CAS 2010. The client has full connectivity. Everything just works. Just works, right? That should be fine. There's no issues with that scenario. In the case where we have a multiple namespace scenario, then it's not actually CAS really itself that's doing any redirecting here. There's no redirections. It's about Autodiscover giving you the right URL in the first place. Right? Autodiscover is responsible for making sure you hit the right endpoint in the first place. That's the key thing really to remember with any of these, with these multiple URLs. Now in a 2007 coexistence scenario, we have the legacy namespace. You always have to be talking to a CAS that's on the same version. In 2007, if your mailbox is on 2007, you need to talk to a 2007 CAS for EWS. But again, it's Autodiscover that's handing this information back to the client. It's not really up to Exchange. So the Autodiscover request should ensure that this is actually what's happening. If for some reason you didn't use Autodiscover, you chose not to configure Autodiscover, and you just tried to somehow force all the connectivity to come through CAS 2013, in this scenario, you just won't have EWS working properly for a 2007 user. You'll have a ton of errors, nothing will work. Autodiscover is becoming more and more vital for proper operation of an Outlook client or a MacLook client or any other clients that are using EWS applications or so on and so on. And exactly the same is true when your mailbox is in another site as well. And in fact, this one, you'd have the legacy, you'd be using the legacy URL coming back from Autodiscover for this one, and then you rely on the CAS to CAS proxy to ensure that connectivity is good for your client. Looks a complicated diagram, but actually not really any more complicated than any of the others that we've got, really, when you think about it. We're nearly there on the protocol stuff, don't worry. It's heady stuff, right? And again, if we had another namespace, you'd actually be, again, relying on Autodiscover to get you to your endpoint. So let's summarize this. Try and summarize it. And I know it's very, I've gone through those at length. It was kind of hopefully interesting to show how all these different things work. So the way I'd summarize it would be this. In a coexistence with 2010 scenario, CAS 2013 will just make it work. We'll just proxy, regardless really of, we'll redirect to external URLs for things like OA if they're available, but otherwise than that, we'll just proxy the connection. We'll make CAS 2013 the common entry point for for mailbox 2010 or 2013 users. In a 2007 coexistence scenario, it's a bit more complicated. We redirect OA, we proxy Autodiscover, POP and IMAP, and even Outlook Anywhere. If you think about those connections for Outlook Anywhere, they're actually kind of proxied. So to say that we don't proxy to 2007 really isn't true. We kind of do, but really for a very narrow set of protocols. But Autodiscover is important for EWS to make sure that clients receive the right EWS URLs. We don't do the 451 redirects, I mentioned that, but the legacy versions of Exchange still do. So 2007 and 10 will still do 451s, and they'll do 451s to 2013, but not the other way around. And this last bullet here really is that you need to keep a 2007 CAS in the internet-facing site for as long as you have 2007 mailbox users in non-internet-facing sites. Because one of the scenarios that people would get themselves into is they'd have two AD sites that have 2007 in both. They'd put CAS 2013 in the internet-facing site and then remove CAS 2007. And that cuts off connectivity to CAS 2007 in the non-internet-facing site. So don't fall into that trap. Leave a CAS 2007 in the internet-facing site until you've gotten rid of all the 2007 users. Okay. All right. So let's Let's move, have a little change of gear here, move on a little. So FBA, forms-based auth in OA, has changed, not just for the white look, the new look, but the way that it works. Because we've been saying right from the beginning of talking about Exchange 2013 that we no longer require layer 7, we no longer require affinity. And you might be wondering, if you've ever configured OA, FBA and load balancers and whatever they may be before, we had to make sure we had affinity. We had to ensure we had affinity because we had this thing called a cookie, and the cookie was used as an authentication token from the client to the server. And if you took your cookie and you got it from one server and you present it back to another server, it was invalid. And you had to reauth, and you got the pop-up. You've probably seen that, right? You go and create a new mail, you might get a pop-up window, and that pop-up window would include a new little forms-based auth page, which is really helpful. Okay? And you might be wondering, well, why don't we... because let me tell you, you don't have the same problem in 2013. So I'll explain why. Only because it's kind of interesting, if you like that kind of thing. So there is an important component to this, which is you put the same certificate on all of the CAS that you're going to be load balancing between. So if I take my 3 guys in the front row here, right, they all have exactly the same certificate. And I don't mean the same certificate with the same name, but different certificates. I mean the same certificate. And so if I authenticate to any one of these CASs, he will then hand me back a token, the cookie, and he will encrypt the cookie with the private key, I will encrypt, the cookie with the public key of his certificate. I will use the public key of the certificate that he owns, and he owns, and he owns. So when I hand back my authentication token wrapped up with his public key, encrypted with his public key, he can decrypt it because he has the private key. When I hand the same token back to another CAS, he can decrypt it because he's got the same private key, and so on and so forth. You can see that because they all share exactly the same certificate, we changed the logic in Exchange such that the encryption of a cookie wasn't done using something only the server knew. It's done using something they've all got, which is the shared SSL certificate. So if I toss my cookie at this gentleman here, see, I didn't even know why that's funny, right? You can tell from the accent I didn't get the joke. But anyway, apparently if I toss my cookies at Scott, he's all right with that. He said that's fine, and he knows exactly what to do with the cookie tossing that goes on. But do you see how kind of simple, it's kind of elegantly simple, and, I love it. It's simple, cool, right? It just works. So an important change, the key thing obviously is certificate. Make sure they've all got the same certs. The challenge will come slightly when the certificate expires and you have to do a renewal. All right? The logic currently doesn't say if I've got this certificate, 2 certificates, and I pick and choose, it can be either. Currently the logic isn't there for that. But as long as you can handle the certificate management, it means that you don't have to think about affinity. So then when you go back to some of the diagrams and think about some of these layer 4 client connecting to multiple CAS scenarios, that's exactly why, because it doesn't matter if OA sets up 2 or 3 connections for me and they all go to different CASs, because they can all decrypt it. I'm authenticated for every single connection, and they all funnel them back to the same server. Magic, innit? Well, not quite, but that's how it works. Okay? All right, so leads again neatly, I hope, into the area of load balancing. So let's talk about load balancing here for a second. So again, to reiterate, we've said we don't require affinity, and it's not just OA that doesn't require affinity. An Outlook Anywhere client connecting has multiple HTTP streams, but each one of them is authenticated separately. The client authenticates every HTTP connection. And so it doesn't matter from an Outlook Anywhere perspective if I've got 3 CAS and some of them go here, some of them here, and some of them here, because again, they all go back to the same place. As long as each connection is authenticated, the CAS itself isn't generating any business logic, isn't actually really doing anything other than proxying the connection to the back-end server. And the back-end server is doing all the hard work for me, generating OA for me and maintaining all the connection information, my mailbox information that's going on between client and server. So what this means really is we can use what we tend to call layer 4 load balancing, right? But Layer 4 versus layer 7 can be some ways of referring to it, or we can think about session affinity. Meaning I don't want HTTP affinity. I don't need to decrypt the packet, have a look inside, figure out what's going on, and then figure out which CAS to send it to. I'm only interested in maintaining affinity really at the session layer. And what I mean by that is I don't want the load balancer. I don't want the load. If I have an established TCP session, I want that to stay between me and the load balancer. But I don't really care anything more than that. I don't want the load balancer throwing the connection down. I want to keep the session up, right, and not be thrown around. But whatever session I've got established stays. But I don't care if I have sessions across multiple CASs. Okay? But at layer 4, we have no idea what the client is actually trying to do, unlike layer 7. At layer 4, all I've got is a destination IP address, port, and protocol, really. They're the only kind of things I really know. I don't know if the client is trying to get to OA. No idea. I don't see that far inside. At layer 7, I do. I decrypt the SSL. I can see all the way up to layer 7 of the OSI model. And I know exactly what the client's trying to do. At layer 4, I've got fileless information as a load balancer to work with. Now, sounds good, but it can actually introduce some other challenging problems. So let's have a look at what those are. So this slide is, again, important to realize that this is what we're talking about here, that the load balancer can spread the connections across multiple CASs, but because they all go back to the same place, this is how we manage to perform this trick, if you like. So at layer 4, I've got a user on the left, I've got a layer 4 load balancer, and a CAS on the right. When I look at it from a session perspective, a layer 4 perspective, my client makes a request. My client actually knows he's trying to get to the EWS Exchange ASMX endpoint TCP 443. But the load balancer sees an IP address and a port. He's not doing SSL termination. So he doesn't really know what I'm trying to do. He just knows that I've been told to send the traffic to a CAS. I don't know what you're trying to do. I just got to find a CAS that's up and available. Now, the problem with this, the limitation rather with this, is it's great from if you think about a simple, if it were just a web page request or something like that, it doesn't really matter. As long as the target server's up, we're good. CASs or Exchange and Outlook and client connectivity is a little more complex. So we might have several CAS, and we might have different health for different bits of the same CAS. So how do we figure out where to send the traffic when we don't really know? So you can typically do something called health checking on a load balancer, right? So you can do this health checking thing. And so you might determine that to configure the load balancer, I'm going to check server name, WAC, OA. And if I get some kind of response, or I might check some other URL, if I get some kind of response, I consider that to be up and working. There's my health check. Well, the problem is that if all the connections are coming in this particular case, using mail.contosa.com, and mail.contosa.com could be Outlook Anywhere, it could be an EWS app, it could be ActiveSync, it could be an OA connection, because we're using the simplified namespace type model and trying to have one name for everything. Which VDA are you going to pick to check health for? So you decide to pick OA. I'm going to see if the OA FBA page comes up on every 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever, take your pick. And if the OA app pool goes down, I'm going to mark the server as down. Well, that was a ballsy move. Because the client wasn't trying to get to the OA app at all. He was actually an Outlook Anywhere client trying to get to RPC. So you have just dropped a CAS out of the pool because OA was unhealthy because you didn't actually know really what the client was trying to do. Now let me throw this other little thing in there for you. Managed availability understands the health of each of these different IIS app pools and IIS and the CAS as a whole. And he's expecting, at this stage, I call managed availability a he, but let's say it expects that this CAS is taking load for everything except OA, because OA is the only thing that's down. It knows that. And so in the calculations and actions that it decides to take, it's assuming that ECP, EWS, EAS, OAB, etc. are all taking load. Well, they're not in this case, because the load balancer decided to toss him out the pool. And so managed availability could even make an incorrect decision based on what you're actually seeing, what your load balancer has decided to do versus its view of the world. You can see how we can get a little bit disparate, okay? Two different views of the same thing. So obviously in this case, the client connectivity is problematic. What if you decide to choose multiple VDIRs? Well, I mean, either way, right, you still have the same problem. And so really the summary of this would be, at layer 4 with a single namespace, health is per server, not per protocol. That's how I would define it. The health is really per server, not per protocol. Speaking about health checking, we've added something new in 2013 as well. And this is a managed availability provided feature. We've actually provided per protocol health checking that your load balancer can call into. And if your load balancer calls into these individual, EWS and it's healthcheck.htm, there is no HTML page if you go digging around in the file system. It's generated, on the fly by the server. And managed availability is an aspect of this, and it will give you back a 200 OK if this app pool and this application is considered healthy by managed availability in the server. So that's good, right? Per application level, health checking integrated into the managed availability framework. We love that. Now, I'll give you one warning that the OA health check relies on FBA being enabled. So if you don't have FBA enabled because you're doing FBA on something else, cue what we'll talk about a little bit later, then currently this won't work for OA, but for the rest this should work great. Okay, so I'll throw that one in there. That one's for bonus points. But back to the load balancing. All right, now layer 7, things are a bit different. And layer 7 means I'm going to terminate SSL at the load balancer. I'm going to have a good old poke around at the traffic, figure out what it is you're trying to do, and then decide where to send it. And this is obviously what we did with 2010. So we know the traffic is going to mail.contosa.com whack RPC. So therefore one of our health probes is checking the RPC virtual directory. If the RPC virtual directory is down, the client is down. But if the client's actually trying to connect to OA and the OA VDIR is up, client connectivity is up. As you would expect, right? But for this to happen, you've got SSL termination happening here at the load balancer. And the load balancer is decrypting, figuring out possibly and probably re-encrypting the traffic before it goes back to CAS. More complex though, more expensive typically. But the benefit is, with a single namespace, you have per protocol health now, because you know where the endpoint's going. Now, this is one just to throw out there, just for giggles, really. I have definitely seen people do this, and in fact, this is quite a nice idea. What about, because you get the benefit of layer 4, the downside with layer 4 was, as you remember, health is per server. You don't really know the protocol that the client's trying to use. But what if you did this? Looks like I'm in jail now behind all these things, right? What if you had oa.contosa.com and ecp.contosa and ews.contosa.com? Well, why not? Because does the client get to see any of these? Not really. Typically, these are ActiveSync clients that are configured for this, or Outlook Anywhere clients are configured for that. It's not really anything that the client sees. The only one really the client gets to see typically is OA, because you tell them the OA URL, right? But then, if you took that approach, you could actually end up at layer 4, so no need for SSL termination, but you have per protocol health available to you. So throwing that one out there for fun. So what it really means is, and what we've tried to explain in our load balancing discussions, we're talking about Exchange 2013, you have choices. It's not just layer 4. Sure, you can do layer 4, and there's a couple of different ways you can do layer 4. Or you can do layer 7. I mean, if you've already invested in the hardware, you've already got the technology to do it, then maybe layer 7 is the thing you carry on with. And that's cool. But really, it's about providing choices for those with less IT skills, less hardware, less desire to own and manage the IT in such a way, versus those who really want to maximize the technology that they've invested in. They can do a layer 7 approach. Pros and cons, trade-offs for both. Hopefully that gives you something to think about in terms of, when you think about how you're going to do load balancing for 2013. So to summarize the load balancing piece, so at layer 4, the load balancer doesn't really understand what the endpoint is. And whatever you pick for health may or may not be the right endpoint that you're picking for health. A layer 7, you definitely know what the client is trying to get to, but it's more expensive, more processing. The whole layer 7 piece is more complex. And I've already mentioned the last two quite a bit, all right? So obviously, the multiple name thing is kind of an interesting idea. The trade-off for that, obviously, is you need multiple IP addresses on the external interface of the load balancer, multiple names on the certificates or wildcard, and this is more complex from a configuration perspective, but it does give you some interesting ideas. I'd like to see if people try that. Let me know. It'd be fun. We do have some customers who've done it. You wouldn't be the first. Don't worry. I'm not going to send you out there on a limb. All right, so let's try and wrap this up, or get towards the end here, with publishing Exchange 2013 to the internet. So how many of you cried a little, and it's okay to admit it, you were in a room with friends when TMG was announced as dead? That's embarrassing. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Right. But I admire your bravery for owning up. Right, okay. So now TMG has been announced as being no more. And some of you may know, I spent a little bit of time figuring out TMG and getting it to work with Exchange over the last few years. And I love the product, right? It does a great job doing exactly what we needed it to. But we've made a decision that TMG is no more. So what should you do? Well, the first thing you should do is panic. It's a really good idea. But once you finish panicking, and I panicked for quite a while, I was really trying to exert some, do everything I could. But it was one of those things that a decision had been made, and you know what? I've come to terms with it, and I'm going to explain why I've come to terms with it. And this has not been an easy thing for me to come to terms with, but I'm sharing, right? Because I remember going to TechEd, IT Forum as it was, back in Europe, listening to some of the MCS guys talk about ISA Server and Exchange Server 2000 better together, publishing them on the internet, and it was the business, right? Application inspection and all of that clever stuff, right? And I was thinking, wow, yeah, you've got to put ISA Server in front of Exchange. And do you know why? Because Exchange 2000 was pretty insecure, wasn't it? In fact, Windows and everything back at that stage had security challenges. So let me ask you this. Do we still have the same problems today? Yes, in the same way that we had them? No. Right. We might have different problems, but there's a different question, right? Didn't ask that one. I wouldn't be stupid enough to ask, do we have problems? I don't think I need to ask. Anyway, right. But the point really is that initiatives like trustworthy computing and the way our industry has changed over the last 10 years have changed the problems that we are seeing in the security, in the side of security. So publishing open relays, like kind of default, like we used to, some years ago, they don't exist anymore. Exchange is secure out of the box. We say that, but we really mean it. I mean, Exchange is secure out of the box. You can't and Windows, you cannot exploit things you should not be able to on a properly configured box out, straight set up, and away you go. The problems that we used to have don't exist anymore. So my question to you then is, if the problems that we were guarding against 10 years ago don't exist today, then why are we still using a solution that was designed 10 years ago? Right? I'm giving you a bit of an opinion piece rather than a hard factual piece here, right? But if the same risks are not present, then perhaps what we should do is reevaluate the risks that exist today and then think, what is the right solution for them? Now, we feel, as a company, that the risks, we have already mitigated against the risks that we were protecting against from that time ago, where ISA and TMG were the answers to those problems. Pre-authentication and application inspection and all of that. Those products are not... Exchange has all of that built in now, Exchange and Windows together. I've developed features for the Exchange product and have to go through security review for even simple features. You go through a huge amount of work with security auditors trying to poke holes and figure out how they can exploit your feature, even if it's not internet-facing or whatever it may be. There's an awful lot of investment and work that's gone in. So I guess really the point would be things have moved on, so maybe we should too, and think about it differently. Okay? So people still do, though, some of the things that they used to do 10 years ago and people think are a bad idea. So account lockout policies. How many people have probably still got account lockout policies enabled in their orgs? Too many. And do you know why? We've been telling people not to do it for years. And account lockout policies are an invitation to a denial of service. If I know somebody's SMTP address, because chances are these days it's configured as their UPN, because it makes it so much easier. Right? If their UPN is equal to their SMTP address, people can just log on with their SMTP address. As far as they know, it's their SMTP address. They don't also know it's their UPN. If I know your SMTP address and I know your OA FBA page, I can lock your account out, just for fun. From inside or outside, it really doesn't matter. So account lockout policies are something we've been trying to get people away from using for a number of years, and instead use password, strong password phrases, monitoring, all of that stuff. So changing our behavior as well is still something that we need to do. We haven't had TMG, UAG in front of Exchange at Microsoft for a number of years now. We do not have TMG or UAG in front of Office 365. Do you know what we have? We have this thing. It's called a load balancer. Because if a load balancer is configured such that it only allows connections inbound to TCP 443, is it not essentially a packet filter? Assuming that your firewall is secure, or your load balancer is a hardened, secure, well-maintained, monitored device, if the only traffic it allows in is TCP 443, then is that not pretty much what most people's TMG servers are doing? Okay, you have pre-auth. Great. That's pretty much about the only real thing it buys you at this stage. And so, I'm trying to argue the case for TMG isn't there anymore, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It might be an opportunity to reevaluate some of the security concerns that caused us to put those things in 10 years ago and decide, are they still valid today? And I would argue that some of them are not. Some of them maybe still are, and maybe you have to think about how you mitigate those, right? But, account lockouts, come on. I mean, that's crazy stuff, right? But some things maybe we can reevaluate. Have the discussion with the security folks. You have to have pre-authentication. Why? Because it's in the policy. When did you write the policy? 1984. Great, that's really good. All right, so I'm not saying completely get rid of it. I know there are certain customers and scenarios and industries where doing something like this would be sacrilegious, but I'll say it anyway. What if you do want to have something, though? If you absolutely have to. So UAG. UAG does now support Exchange 2013 with Service Pack 3, I think it is, for UAG. There's also an update past that. And UAG can do a fine job of providing that pre-authentication, one of our products. You can also have a pirate's favorite product, R, right? So the pirate firewall, R, or application routing, oh god, completely gone. Request routing, right? Now, ARR, to give it its perhaps better pronunciation, support I've got here is coming. And by that I mean, we just got to get it published, really. ARR support. Exchange works great with that. All right, we're quite happy with it. We're not really going to directly support it as such, because it's a Windows IIS feature, but we have no problems with working with it with Exchange, and we'll have some guidance out soon. But I'll also throw out there as well that there are load balancer solutions that offer pre-auth modules. So if you can't get hold of TMG, or you've decided that TMG isn't the thing, but you still want to have something that does pre-authentication, then why not combine your load balancer and your pre-authentication requirement into one device? I'm pretty sure you'll find some vendors down on the show floor who will probably tell you all about the pre-auth capabilities within their devices. So if that really is something you're interested in, that might be something you want to go and talk to them about down on the show floor. Okay? I realize that's a slightly controversial topic, but I hope if at least for a few of you it gives you cause to think about some of the decisions that go on around things like TMG, and have an honest conversation about what you're trying to guard against. Maybe it will help. All right, so we're going to wrap up with we can have about 10 minutes left for questions. And we also have some of these architecture posters down here as well. Certainly anyone asking a question gets an architecture poster signed by Ross Smith and Scott Schnoll. And if you pay twice as much, only one of them will sign it. So let me just summarize the session for you then, right? So CAS 2013 authenticates, locates, and proxies. 2010 coexistence, pretty much seamless. 2007, less so. And the thing about load balancer affinity, right, is that you can get away. Seriously, there's a microphone there if you'd like to use it, sir, if you don't want to. Okay, then that would be one approach you can use. All right, so I'm going to, at that stage, then let me just wrap this up here for a second, and then I'll take questions once we get to the very end. So obviously, don't forget to keep an eye on the blog. We have lots of useful and interesting articles going on all the time, and we just love Twitter. We're all Twitter-tastic. I'm going to be down on the show on the office stand tomorrow and Wednesday if you want to come down and hurl abuse and tell me why I'm completely wrong about security and Exchange. That would be very welcome. Don't forget to fill out your eval. You can win an Xbox and apparently a big gift tag token, which looks really terrific. So I hope the session's been useful, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.